Dale, we're here talking again about the redemption story, and as we were talking before we got on camera, it didn't start out as redemption.
No, absolutely. The redemption story is kind of a unique name because we didn't have a name in our first initial days. I think I might have the very first week said Jasper Christian Church just because it didn't have a name, but we very quickly adapted or adopted the name Christian Church of Jasper. And the idea was, obviously, we were a Christian church. We talk a lot in our movement about just being simply Christians and not having other names on it. We were the Christian church, and we were at Jasper. We were in Jasper. And so we started that way, and it served us really well for a lot of years. CCJ became a very branded name throughout the community. People knew. You said CCJ, they knew who we were talking about. And that's what we were really and for a number of years, and it served us well because even when we, even though people drove from Spencer and County and Orange County, Crawford County, maybe some from Pike County, some from Martin County, even though they drove from those places, they were still coming to a church in Jasper. And so the name fit. And it didn't until it became time to open up our multi-site campuses, which is part of our mission. Our approach is taking what we do, the DNA, to other areas that don't have churches like this close by. So when we decided to do that, we thought, you know what? First one was in Martin County. You can't be the, Christian Church of Jasper in Logoti. It just doesn't work. First of all, you grew up in this region, this area, and you've lived in Jasper a number of years. You know that a lot of our neighbors don't love Jasper in terms of the school rivalries and so on and so forth. And so that wasn't going to work. It wasn't very descriptive of who we are. And so we began to talk about, you know what? Let's pick a name that really describes who we are, no matter where we're at in terms of the town that we're located in. What would be a name that would really essentially describe our purpose and DNA in one name? And I don't even know exactly how we landed on it, but we said, you know what? This is about redemption through Jesus Christ. Redeeming is a theme. So what if we were Redemption Christian Church? And the elders quickly jumped on board and said, you know what? That's a great name. And, we're not one of those churches. We don't put it to a vote to the people or anything like that. We just said simply the why. Why are we doing this? And everybody jumped on board. And actually, people within the church accepted it much faster than people outside the church because they were so used to the whole CCJ thing. But it didn't take long. And now, obviously, the Redemption name is just as well recognized as what CCJ was. And I think a great description that can live on forever, no matter where we're located.
Well, you make it seem as if the naming conventions came rather simple. And speaking from firsthand experience, as I've thought of naming a business or a nonprofit aspect, the name piece is a struggle. Mm-hmm. So when you looked at the Christian Church of Jasper and you looked at your dream of perhaps one day having a church, did it really come that simple, or were there discussions you had throughout your life that maybe helped bring you to that?
Oh, I would say that's true in all cases. When things are simple, they're usually simple because somewhere the hard stuff's happen. But the discussion part leading up to, we had probably 3 or 4 names that came out there that were options, but nothing really, that was just like, we've got to do that, or no divisiveness in it. People didn't have a name that they're. A lot of people, they want to name the church after something in the Bible. I'm not putting those down, but it's like the reason the church at Ephesus was the church at Ephesus because it was at Ephesus, not because it's a more biblical name to. And so we just thought, let's go. What describes who we are, and maybe it's something that you don't know a lot of. I don't know a ton of redemption. I've since come to know that there's a couple in Arizona, and I'm sure there's some other places as far as the Redemption Church, but there's not a lot. And so, and so the hard work there ahead of time, I think it comes down to this. I read a book a few years ago called Start With Why, and I can't even tell you who wrote it. You probably can, but the whole idea is if you start with the why of things, the what and the how is less important because it's all about the what's and the hows is all about getting to the why. Why are we doing this? Because intentionality and clarity about what you're doing, why you're doing it, is so important.
The purpose.
The purpose. And so that really, I don't think I even talked about this in our origin story, but there were 2 books in my hand, in addition to obviously the Bible, which was the most important book, 2 other books in my hand that I had picked up and given that really informed the approach to ministry I wanted to do. And one of them was Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church. A lot of people know about the Purpose-Driven Life that he wrote later that's so popular. It wasn't half the book in my mind as Purpose-Driven Church. And so I really dug into that one and read that one, and it was important to me to understand the purpose behind what we're doing. The other book was a mentor of mine, a guy that was a hero in the preaching ministry faith of mine growing up, Bob Russell, who was the lead minister at Southeast Christian Church during a time when it went from about 140 people to over 20,000 people in Louisville, Kentucky. And he wrote a book just basically called When God Builds a Church. And in that book, When God Builds a Church, he outlined 10 principles that are there every time God builds a church. And so those 2 kind of books really helped just gestate in me and just to develop this passion for purpose in what we're doing, not just doing church, not just having church, but actually being a church on a mission, on purpose, and doing things on purpose. And that's kind of really been a driving force from the early days. That whole first sermon we preached about wrecking the roof still laid true. Like, that's why we're here, to wreck the roof, to remove barriers to get people to Jesus, which is still one of our mantras today. And so that to me it makes it simple when it comes to the time to make those decisions. Not everything's simple and easy, but certainly less complicated than a lot of organizations.
Well, you alluded to it, and certainly, writing a donation to the church or making a contribution and putting CCJ down on the check was a pretty simple thing.
Yeah.
Redemption took a little more cursiveness, so to speak, in that regard. You're thinking, what did Daryl change that name for, that piece? But you and I have spoke about this a few times in discussions we've had about the meaning of redemption and how it really did align with your multi-site vision.
Yeah, it really did, because one of the things that I think that you're trying to do if you're a Great Commission, a Great Commandment church, you're trying to redeem culture. You're not throwing it out. You're not discarding it. You're trying to redeem it. And the best way to redeem it is by Jesus redeeming the people in it. That's the way that happens, rather than external rules and laws that don't change the heart of man, but redeeming the person. And so literally, I think it just was very descriptive of who I think the church should be. Jesus is redeeming us and has redeemed us and is constantly in that work of redemption in us. And so therefore, then we go out and we're redemptive to the cultures around us. And so really, to me, it's a good name.
It becomes very simple
Yeah.
when you hear it said that way. You mentioned culture. Your organization has been together, some changes over more than 20 years now. How do you feel? Because myself, looking at it from a distance, and I'm sure many others in the community, part of the church itself over those 20 plus years, the culture has been very consistent. It seems like there's been an intentionality. Many organizations, be it a church, be it nonprofit, be it for-profit, struggle with that consistency in culture. Mm-hmm. What would you credit that to here at Redemption?
Well, God, but that's simplistic, I know, an answer. But I think the second part of that is then us in sticking to that simplistic purpose and mission and outline. The whole reason for us developing these mantras and adapting these mantras and adopting these mantras was to keep us reminded of who we are, because mantras are repeatable sayings that help remind you of who you are and what you're about. And so we've tried to keep those in the forefront. Clarity. I talk about with young preachers, because I'm not really a young preacher anymore. Talk to young preachers.
That's relative, by the way.
That's right, it is. because I talk all the time about the importance of vision dropping within your messages. In other words, I may be preaching a sermon on marriage from the Gospels or from the Bible, but there's oftentimes within that then to drop part of that vision that you're talking about in an example that you use, in an illustration that you use. And so if I'm talking about marriage works best if we love our spouse as Christ loved the church. And how did he love the church? He gave himself up for her, and he ultimately died for the church as a sacrifice. And so then there's an awesome opportunity. I'm not just preaching on marriage, but I can talk about, and that's why as a church, we always want to be a church that sacrifices for the mission. We always want to be a serving church. We always, you just have chances, no matter what you're teaching on, to constantly vision drop the mission of the church to remind them of it. We put it on our walls. We put it on our we say it a lot from the stage. Literally, I send LG is our teaching pastor. We share the preaching duties here at the Jasper campus that go out to our other campuses most of the time. And literally, when I sent him my sermon, he was like, "That would be a great opportunity to drop the wreck the roof," or that'd be a great opportunity to mention, grip the plow, to mention those mantras that we have. And so we're constantly reminding ourselves to remind the church and to keep that before them and kind of guard that. You guard the mission of the church so that there's not mission drift. Mission drift is simply, if you've ever been in the ocean, we did fall break at Gulf Shores, no, not at Gulf Shores, Destin, doesn't matter, that area. And, you go outside where you're staying and you get in the water and you're out there floating in the water. Next thing you know, it's not hard to look and say, oh, there's our condo way down there. You've drifted without even realizing it. And I think the church and any organization has a tendency to drift without realizing it. How do you not drift? Well, you keep that constant focus anchored in on that area that you're trying to stay close to. And we do that, I think. I think that's one of the things we probably do well. And you create a culture rather than a strategy. Your strategies just are about re-emphasizing that culture, because culture will trump strategy for breakfast every time. I don't know how many companies, how many churches, how many organizations have a mission statement on the wall, but if you see the behaviors and the activities of that organization, it doesn't match what that mission is on the wall at all.
That's interesting. I have experienced that myself, observed that in many cases, and it seems those who live their mission most rarely say, here's our mission statement, but it comes out in that underlying message. And at the same time, similar to what you're stating, Daryl, it's a consistency, that intentionality that doesn't get overlooked. Many times leaders, speakers may look and say, well, I've already talked about that, I'm not going to talk about that again. But talking about it once means to be effective and sustained, perhaps it needs to be built upon time and time again.
Yeah. So two things to reinforce that with us in terms of from the stage, the platform. Barna Research would say the average churchgoer attends less than 2 times a month now. I don't think that's completely true in the mass majority of our attenders, but it's still there and it's a reality. And so you may feel like you're stating it and they're hearing it all the time, but they're really not, because they're only in those seats a limited number of times. And the bottom line is things have to be repeated to get it. And so you have to repeat it till you're so tired of hearing it because of that. And here's the other part that's even more important, because we're a church that's constantly trying to reach new people. You have new people every single week. There is not a single week in the history of this church that I know of that there hasn't been first-time visitors, first-time guests. And so if you're not constantly reinforcing it, how does the first-time guest ever get that? And so it's just important to keep that mission and that purpose and those statements before everybody.
As we get ready to wrap up this episode of the Redemption Story, we've talked about culture. Mm-hmm. Has there ever been a time in the 21 or so years that the church has been in existence, whether it was CCJ or the redemption story, to where Darrell Land lost sleep because of concern over the culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's less than probably a lot of places because of the behaviors we put in place and the things we put in place. But absolutely, there's been times when I thought, are we going off here, or is someone trying to take us off? Because what happens is a lot of times, especially when we're smaller, people would come from other church backgrounds. That's why I love to reach unchurched people. No offense to anybody that comes, because they don't have their own preconceived ideas about what it should be. But so they would bring their church culture with them, and if they would get any position of influence, they would try to change that. I had a leader in this church, great guy, fantastic guy, but he loved the church he attended before moving to Jasper, to Du Bois County, when he was at a previous job. He loved that church and what they did. And we were never going to be that church, but he wanted us to be that church. And I just had to simply say, hey, we're not going to be them. That what you're looking for is not us. And if you're looking for that, then you probably aren't going to be happy here. But if you can focus in on jumping in board here, then that's great. And, you know, that may sound harsh, but you can't allow that to cause a drift. And so there was times when we had that. We had some times where we definitely had some points where I think things were trying to take us off mission, sometimes unintentionally, but we couldn't do it. We've had people leave the church because they wanted this or they wanted that or they didn't like this, and you got to be willing to let them go. Say, hey, you're always welcome here, but we understand. We're sorry we can't meet your need, but this is who we're going to be, and you just got to hold to that. But yeah, there's definitely been times where I've lost some sleep. I think a lot less than people who are trying to change a culture that already existed. I think you lose a lot more sleep with that. I've had friends that go and try to turn around churches that were kind of sinking. Whole lot more loss of sleep in that scenario than what we did.
Well, I'd like to build on that a little bit more, because I think you've got a great leadership message, not only for churches on that cultural management piece and ensuring it doesn't manifest itself into something that's not intended. We could pick up on that with the next episode. Really appreciate the time you're taking to share your story and the team's story, in essence, the redemption story.
Yeah, it is a whole lot of people's story, and I think God's story of this church here. So thanks for doing it too.
Well,
It's
absolutely.
awesome.
God bless you, man.
Yep.